If you're waiting for the perfect shot, the perfect conditions, or the perfect skills before you start, you'll never get there. Street photography isn't about perfection, it's about progress. Every missed shot, every awkward moment, every so-called failure is a step forward. For years I struggled with this, hesitating to press the shutter, overthinking every frame, feeling like I wasn't good enough. But looking back, those struggles were the key to my growth. The best photographers in history weren't the ones who never failed. They were the ones who kept going, learning, and trying again. So let's talk about the habits that held me back and how I overcame them. And why progress matters more than perfection every time. This video is about the signs to be on the lookout for when you're feeling overwhelmed or drained when you're doing street photography. I also believe in sharing my own street photography journey as sincere and truthful as possible, because we live in a perfection culture where we sometimes forget about the struggles that people actually go through. So consider this a little pep talk for whoever needs it, from one street photographer to another. Before we get started, let me just quickly introduce myself. My name is Ambreen, aka Hipster in Copenhagen, and this is my vlog where I talk about all things street photography. The first thing I want to talk about is something I believe a lot of street photographers have experienced to some degree when wanting to learn something new, like a new street photography technique. I can only talk about myself, and I'm a highly analytical person, which means that I like to be as prepared as possible, which also means that I often research topics before I even get started. Years ago, when I was a newbie street photographer, I had the tendency to over-prepare, and that just sucked the energy right out of me. Often because I didn't get the results that I was expecting, even though I was fully prepared, and that really frustrated me. So I had to learn the hard way that being prepared doesn't yield results instantly or even in the first try. This is also called analysis paralysis or paralysis by analysis. So basically overthinking so much that you put yourself in a state of paralysis, unable to do the thing that you wanted to do in the first place. Sometimes it's so freeing not to overthink everything and just be able to stay in the now. And this is a concept I read about in a book called The Power of Now by E. Tully. I'll link it in the description below. But most of my progress came from trial and error and just being out there on the streets and learn as I go. If you want to punish yourself, the best way is to compare yourself to other street photographers. And as the saying goes, comparison is the thief of joy. So for me personally, back in 2023, I decided that I wanted to do a digital detox, another great book that I read. And I actually ended up reducing my social media presence and consumption quite drastically. Also because social media wasn't actually adding anything of value in my life. And I also found out later that I wasn't missing out on much anyway. The point I'm trying to make here is that I spend a lot of time chasing the wrong superficial things, like having a large following, a lot of likes, at least for me. And I did actually spend a lot of time comparing myself to other street photographers. And that might not have been entirely fair to myself, because you never know where other street photographers are on their journey, what they had to struggle with to get where they are now. But the positive thing that came out of the digital detox that I did was that I realized that I managed to create a small community of dedicated and like-minded street photographers that really appreciated my street photography. So whenever I post something, the feedback is very positive, and I also returned the favor by following their work. And that gives me so much value as a street photographer, to be able to follow progress of other street photographers while also getting recognized for my own work. Doing it for others. So this is actually something I struggle with for quite some time. So whether I'm creating content for this YouTube channel or just making street photographs for myself as a street photographer. But there are two aspects to it, and let me explain. So the first aspect is about street photography and the photographs that I make. So I got into street photography years ago because it gave me a creative outlet that was really different from my career of 14 years as a management consultant, which was very conservative. And prior to this, I hardly had a hobby that I was passionate about. And for some reason, street photography really took, and I got obsessed about it. And I've been doing it for over 8 years now. So the photographs that I make are first and foremost for myself. I do it for myself because it gives me satisfaction to make a photograph that I can look at over over and over and feel a sense of pride because I made that photograph. And because of my skills and creativity, I was able to make that specific photograph. I also consider my photographs as a track record where I can see how far I've come since I started. And this in turn keeps me coming back for more and more when doing street photography. And the second aspect is this YouTube channel. So I started this YouTube channel a year ago with the desire and aim of teaching street photography, mostly for new street photographers or aspiring street photographers. Through my own journey as a completely new street photographer, I didn't know anything about photography, camera, lenses, or let alone being a street photographer. So I wanted to show that you can do anything if you put your mind to it. We live in a culture where perfection is strived for and even celebrated. I can say, looking at my own career, that I subconsciously strive for perfection as well in almost anything I did, especially as a junior consultant. And that left me with a healthy amount of stress and grief that I still have to deal with years later. Perfection can be a dangerous illusion, so the idea of perfection can really hold us back from achievements. If you're always waiting to reach perfection, you might never truly be happy. So in my opinion, it's better to strive for progression, not perfection, especially in street photography. As I mentioned before, I have suffered from the ideals of being perfect or doing things perfectly. But as I matured and gotten older, I can only say that progression over perfection is the way to go, especially in street photography. Because in street photography, repetition makes you better, and the more you practice, the better you'll get eventually. But it's equally important that whatever you set your mind to, you keep doing it until you can see that progression. Back in 2023, when I was thinking about getting serious with this channel, I had the overwhelming fear of failure, like most people do when they're starting out something new that is unfamiliar and you're being vulnerable as well. So for a while, I did struggle with the so-called expert syndrome, and I started to question my own street photography journey and my own experience. And I think that was because I am a self-taught photographer, so I didn't learn photography in a traditional way. And I also started to believe that somehow that made me less qualified to teach. I remember this simple yet powerful statement that really became a defining moment for me in the way I think about creating content for this YouTube channel. So the statement goes like this: you don't need to be an expert to teach somebody. And that really resonated with me. And that is because I have my own lived experience as a street photographer. And when it comes to street photography, that is enough because I can share from my own experience because of the trial and error that I had to go through. And I also believe that is enough for me to pass on to the next street photographer. And from that moment, I haven't looked back ever since. This video is not about failure. It's actually about how to overcome the fear of failure and staying true to yourself as a street photographer. All right, I'll see you in the next one.